Hi. I'm going to talk to you folks a bit today about the idea of critical making as well as the idea of critical learning. So these are some things that I like to think about. These aren't the things that necessarily define me, but I'm definitely a maker, educator, technologist, activist, cyborg, explorer, learner, and general enthusiast. I like not to be tied down by one thing. There are many different intersections that my work takes up. But primarily, it focuses around the maker movement. So as many of you here are involved with the technology industry, I'm sure you've heard of the maker movement. The maker movement is about teaching, it's about learning, it's about making things for yourself. It's also about the democratization of tools. And what that means is basically that there are some big machines, often far-off lands, that make the majority of the objects that we see around us today, but we do not have access to those things. They are reserved for large companies making large runs of things. And the maker movement brings people together in a way where we can all have access to those things. And we can all, as a group, have access to specialized knowledge that we can share, and we can produce things that wouldn't otherwise be able to exist. And one of the mechanisms I use to do this is Site3 CoLaboratory. So Site3 is a makerspace at Bloor and Ossington. We have open house every Tuesday and Thursday nights. Tuesday nights are for women and members of the LGBTQ community. And you can find us at Bloor and Ossington in the alley behind the church. It's not creepy, I promise. There is some rainbow lights and a cyborg mural. You can't miss it. So the idea behind Site3 is really to build a community around technology. So it is built off this principle that there are three sites that make up your life. The first is your home. That's where you spend the most of your time. That's where all of your things are, and that's where you go home at night. But then there's work, and work is where you are during the day. It's another place where you spend a huge amount of your time and invest a huge amount of yourself into it. Even if you don't define yourself by your work, you're still there all the time. And the third place is typically occupied by religion or community. And makerspaces have been taking up this place in people's lives where you can come and you can feel a sense of ownership and a sense of belonging and connect with people. So that's why it's Site3, because it's the third location in your life where you can come and be with people who you can identify with. So if you've ever been to a makerspace, you've probably seen one of these. This is a 3D printer. As we like to say in the maker scene, is people come for the 3D printer, but they stay for the laser. And that's a very in joke. There's a laser cutter just over there you folks can have a look at. They're pretty awesome. These are just two different ways of making your own objects. And they're two of many different ways if you come down to a place like Site3 or one of the close to 10 makerspaces around Toronto, you can learn to make your own objects. And making is awesome. Making is so much fun. It's really empowering. It allows people to feel a lot of joy, a lot of sense of accomplishment, and like they're really doing a whole lot of great things in their lives. And I love making. And before I get too into this, I feel like this is really important that you know this, that I do love making. But because making is so awesome, I actually call myself a community technologist. So I use technology as a medium to build community. So just like as I mentioned, Site3 is kind of this third location where you can go, spaces that are occupied traditionally by religion or community organizations. Those ideas are used as a medium to connect people and a medium to bring people together. So it's not really necessarily about the tools and about the code, but these are really important aspects. They're the glue that's holding the community together. There's something that we can bring people together who are very young people. Sometimes we have members who are teenagers. Sometimes we have members who are retired, across all ages. And I'm working personally very hard to make this a very inclusive space for people of all genders and people of all intersections and races and ethnicities. And that's definitely a large part of my work. So objects are everywhere. You can't exist in this world without interacting with objects. And that's why making them is so amazing. Because there are these things that you take for granted. If you look at the chair you're sitting on, if you think about how each of those parts were molded and manufactured, and how many different chairs you've ever sat on that have different, very specific parts that have to come together in a very specific way, it's really empowering to make these objects and to see how they're made. And the maker movement focuses around this idea of making for you. So what's something that I need in my life that that is slightly different than what's for everyone? How can I take making into my own hands and make it powerful? And it is really, like, I talk about the power of making. It's seeing someone for the first time making an object that they can use, or seeing something that comes from their brain and out into the real world. But what I'm mostly here to discuss is what happens when everyone tries their hand at making. When every one of you goes to a Makerspace and takes a class on 3D printing, or takes a class on laser cutting, or woodworking, or Arduino. Well, what happens is Kipple. So Kipple is an idea from a Philip K. Dick novel, and it's basically, Kipple are the things that accumulate on the edges of our lives. They're those tiny knickknacks that are on all of our shelves, those things we don't quite know what to do with. And when you move out of an apartment or you move out of your home, there are those things that are left in the corner that you have some kind of attachment to. There's a reason you maybe didn't throw them away, but why are they still here, and why are there so many of them? We can't win against Kipple. It is a massive tide that's coming towards us. And I work in several makerspaces, and I witness the production of Kipple firsthand. There's so much of it. Every week, I train like tens of people on how they can make new things that they take home. And some of them come back, and some of them make more things, but some of them don't. Some of them make this thing, and it sits on their dresser and ends up in the corner of their apartment. And that's why I want to talk about critical learning. There's this idea of the responsibility for the things that we have coming into our lives, but we also have a responsibility for the initiative we take to learn tasks. Making is not a necessity for us lucky enough to be here. Most of us operate in this realm of thoughts and ideas, and we're somewhat divorced from the idea of having to make things. Making things then becomes a luxury. It becomes something we get to do and something we get to learn how to do. And this whole idea of entrepreneurship and technologists and all that is causing this collapse of division of labor. So anyone gets to make anything, and anyone gets to learn anything. When I was first going to school, we talked a lot about the T-shaped designer. So the T-shaped designer was able to touch tech and design. And then when I went back for my master's, it was all about the X-shaped designer. So that's technology, design, entrepreneurship, science. It's like increasingly allowing everybody to touch every part of everything, and there's definitely something great about that. But it also creates the fetishization, idealization, and commoditization of fabrication. So we are now being sold this idea of being able to do everything, and we're now, it's become a thing that we don't engage with, we're not required to engage with, and so we can engage with it on a special level, and we can invest our extra time and extra effort into taking those steps to learn things. And so we're sold all of these things that are enabling us to engage with making as a luxury and not as a necessity. So 3D printers actually take thousands of times the energy of producing the same object through injection molding. And that's not something that we're ever talking about. We're talking about the amazingness of 3D printing. And that's fine. I'm not saying we shouldn't be making these things, but we definitely need to be aware of what enables us to be able to engage with technologies on these levels. We need tools to make things accessible. We need specific platforms like the MakerBot that allow us to use a 3D printer. Many of us who've spent a lot of time in makerspaces, if we walked into a large-scale industrial fabrication space, making the same things we've made in makerspaces would be completely lost. There's an entire industry popping up around making tools for making things. And there are many different development boards and platforms such as Arduino, such as MakerBot, such as so many things, SparkFun, Adafruit, all these things that we use all the time, but we have to understand that the industry is shifting in that way. And think of the environmental impact on a board like Arduino, which is able to do so many things. It's a non-specific board. It can accommodate many, many different types of technologies. But in order to do that, it has a massive environmental impact. We're over-making so many things. I've seen so many people make light lamps out of Arduinos. And I'm not saying don't make a lamp out of an Arduino, but I'm just saying think about what you're doing and why is it better to do something yourself? These things are not recyclable. We use them because they're an access point to technology. They're a way that we can learn to use these things without having to go get a science degree, without having to go get a mathematics degree. As I was saying, there's an entire industry popping up around this to find the solution. Why is it better to do things yourself? Jeremy Rifkin calls this the new industrial revolution. It's the shift in social consciousness on how objects interact with our lives. And we have to ask the question, are we at the whim of factory production? That's definitely what spurred this whole maker movement, feeling out of control of the things that we're making. Feeling like we have to take the products that are given to us and that we don't get a say in what they are. So the maker movement gets sprouted out of all of this. How can we, are we vilifying the factory production industry correctly or incorrectly? Makerism is written as a solution for this problem and these frustrations, and it certainly solves some of them. But we have to be conscious of whether or not it's creating different problems. The democratization of tools, in theory, gives people access to these tools to be able to create something else. They are located in lots of spaces that are public, and we invite people to come to them. But if you're not part of the in-crowd, you never get to see the machines. I talk to so many people who have never heard of a Makerspace because they don't know what word they're looking for. It's, this idea is also echoed in maker education. Maker education is this idea of using tools and hands-on learning to produce meaningful learning experiences for youth. But those who create those education models pass on the same biases that they have. So this might be easy for someone who grew up playing with, who grew up disassembling computers, or who grew up learning to build things or sitting with their dad doing something. But there's a huge problem, especially in gender discrepancy, where girls aren't encouraged to experiment the same way with technology. And if we're not encouraged to experiment the same way with technology, the barriers to entry that are written as easy, that these development kits are easy, actually become very, very difficult. We create tools that make outputs very easy, but in that process, we're losing a whole bunch of knowledge. Just because we are not talking about the circuitry that makes your Arduino or 3D printer work does not mean it doesn't exist. There's technologies underneath all of our technologies, and we have to consider the long-term effects of creating these knowledge gaps. If we always make things easy, we teach things to everybody in a way that we can all understand, we start to lose the underlying expertise. And that really worries me. So I'd like to propose that it's not about the tools. And this is a discussion that is beginning to surface in many communities, but it's actually about learning to radically think. And I want to rethink maker education. What do we mean by that? We actually don't mean teach the kids to learn how to program or teach the kids to learn how to 3D print. What we actually mean is we want to teach them how to think laterally. We want to teach them how to investigate. We are in an age where access to technology exists in different ways. Access to technology exists in the form of Google. I can't actually program without Google. I've been a professional programmer for many years. I know many who can't. So we need to teach people how they can access information and how they can find creative solutions. I've seen guides on how to make a makerspace. To me, a makerspace is a place that's made to solve the problems of a community. Every community exists with its own set of predefined knowledge and needs. So when we're going from this particular aspect of some people, already knowing somewhat what types of screwdrivers exist, how to disassemble your computer, and some people lack that basic knowledge, we need to make a space that responds to their needs and not an archetype of a makerspace. Learning is amazing, and I learn things all the time, but what does it really mean to acquire a skill? Are we doing this to contribute to our own personal knowledge? Are we trying to use makerism as a way to solve something? And critically consider what problems makerism is trying to solve. I think it does a lot of things very effectively. it provides a lot of joy and empowerment for a lot of people. It's a really great thing that happens for sure, but is it trying to solve this idea of production? Is it trying to solve this environmental problem? And if so, if that's the goal of it, are we achieving that? Or how can we achieve that? The sharing economy is something that intersects really well with the maker movement. You folks may have heard the Sharing Depot just open on the Danforth, which is an awesome organization. You can go and you can borrow any object from camping equipment to children's toys. And that's something that's in line with the maker movement's ideas of democratization of objects and how we can all share and interact together. And that's a really positive thing I've seen come out of the maker movement. But next time you're in a store and next time you're looking through Walmart at the aisles of pillows or the aisles of toys or towels, think about how genuinely impressive that is. And is that something we actually want to throw away? Is that something we want to stop? Do we want to not utilize this genuinely amazing supply chain that we've created? Or do we want to learn how we can critically engage with it? Because in my opinion, if there's a 3D printer in every home, we're actually doomed. Thank you.